Hi everybody, welcome along. Today we are going to paint the painting that has been voted for by my YouTube channel members. So every month, if you're a YouTube channel member, you get a choice between two really kind of popular topics that are sort of things I've been thinking about painting, and then you get to have the ultimate decision. So today we have got this lovely beach scene, sort of little path down to the beach with lovely grasses and things. So we've got interesting sky tutorial, water, sand, grasses, everything here. And the best thing is we have a reference photo on the community dashboard for you to have a look at too. And of course, if you would love to have your say on what I paint, then you can either join our YouTube channel membership, or on Patreon we also have some perks like that as well. So you can just find out that all below, and that's your way of supporting us, and we are very grateful. But for now, grab your paints. Let's go to the beach. No, sorry. Grab your paints and let's get started. I've got an 8x6" piece of watercolour paper, and I'm just going to draw a horizontal line maybe just shy of halfway up, and that is going to be our horizon line. And then, although I've been doing a lot in my sketchbook with sort of landscapes and beachscapes without drawing any pencil in. I don't know who I was trying to impress, but actually it is nice to have a little bit of pencil just as a guide. So I'm going to just sketch in some of the curving lines. It's so interesting. For a long time I was very intimidated by landscapes in general, but beachscapes in particular, because I was so fixated on the straight lines of beaches. You'd have a long straight line for the horizon, then long straight lines of water, and it was all very sort of still and straight. And I'm a real curvy artist. I'm a botanical artist by, mainly. I found it really difficult. And then I started to just sit on beaches and look at the sort of undulations of the landscape, and I started to see many more curves. And that was a really nice moment for me. And also another place where we find curves is in the sky. So we're going to do a lovely sort of cloudy, one of those sort of overcast skies that I rather like seeing when I'm on a beach. I seem to operate on beaches not in the sort of height of summer. I seem to go to them when no one else is going to them, and I quite like that. And that might be because, as dog owners down in Devon, a lot of beaches in the summer, probably quite rightly, I think, prevent dogs from going on them. Just I don't know. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it, because it's always a shame, but I do understand. And so, yeah, dogs are limited with access to beaches in summer in the UK, so we just don't tend to go to them as much. And therefore, seeing a nice sort of overcast, cloudy sky is kind of more what I associate with being on a beach. So I'm just looking through my palette, picking out Cerulean Blue, Paynes Grey. That is a bit of French ultramarine blue, but it's looking a bit sort of murky. And then I've got some, what is this? I think it's Prussian Blue down here. Some colours that all, apart from French ultramarine, these have all got a slightly sort of grey turquoisey feel to them. And I think I'm going to go up to my large connoisseur brush. We used this last week, and it's a great brush to have in your kit, so I highly recommend you add a larger brush like this, available in my shop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some clouds by what I'm not painting. So I'm going to just use this little buffet of washes, and I'm going to begin sort of down below, starting with a sort of establishing the horizon there, and just curving my brush up. I'm on dry paper, but I'm going to try and sort of soften some of those curls, and then I'm going to come in sort of from above and start to establish some cloud shapes. So everything is curls and curves apart from that initial stroke down there. And what we're trying to do is get that sense of the rolling, fluffy shape in the sky. But also when you have an overcast day, it's sometimes hard to even see where sky is and where cloud is. So I've always enjoyed painting these kinds of cloudy skies because you can just sort of keep it all moving. Okay, and now I'm going to get a little bit more Paynes Grey, and I've got a size 8 brush here, and I am going to start to sort of just place in a tiniest bit of sort of deeper, darker colour in there, just sort of on the bottom edges of some of these shapes. And then I'm going to clean my brush off and I'm going to start to soften some of these harder edges. And we're going to just sort of let this be for a little bit. And we can focus on our water at the same time because we get a lot of reflection in colour from the water. But there in this reference photo, which is over on the community dashboard, has got a bit more green in it. So I've got some aqua green there, and it's just been completely swallowed up by the Paynes Grey, but I can still see a little bit of it lurking in there. So that feels like quite a nice colour. Now that line is probably just the tiniest bit damp. So I'm going to sort of start somewhere in the middle here. And I'm using sort of the tip of my size 8 brush. Keeping it moving. I'm sort of slightly hovering the tip of the brush and then using like the ball of my hand to sort of rest on the page. And then I could sort of come in from the sides. And what's happening is all this liquid on the brush is slowly being used up, and I'm just resulting in a bit of dry brushing, which is managing to create some lovely little highlights on the water. And I've got barely anything left on the brush now, but I am going to go right up to the back now. Just kind of pushing what I've got left on the brush. So I've been asked a lot to do seascapes over the years, but the joy of this is I put a poll to my YouTube channel members and they voted for this. In fact, they've been voting quite sort of enthusiastically for a seascape, but it's been pipped to the post a few times. So I'm very happy that it won this month. It feels very appropriate. So you can see now that I'm just taking the same colour, but I'm sort of glazing it on top with a kind of, again, still a sort of dry brush effect because the paint is drying so fast. It's working really nicely. So it's creating two kind of textured layers. But as I come down the front, there are a few sort of white sort of horses on the waves, little sort of foamy bits. So I want to just be even more careful in defining some white elements. And what is absolutely amazing is I'm using my size 8 brush here to do these very fine points. And that's what I love. If you can get yourself confident with the brush, you will be able to paint a whole piece without having to switch over brushes too many times. And that is really a thing that can interrupt your flow. And I think watercolour in particular, of all the mediums, is very reliant on the painter feeling like they're just in the zone and enjoying the process, as I am right now. So that's looking really nice. I'm really happy with that. I'm going to come back to both of these layers and add in some extra layers and texture and all that kind of thing. But I'm just sort of letting them dry right now, and then we'll start to place in some basic layers on the sand. I'm now going to wake up some raw sienna, some raw umber. The sand is very pale, so I don't feel like I need some really rich colours, but I think buff titanium, and here's the surprise one, moon glow. Moon glow is my sort of warm shadow. I find it a very useful colour when I want to knock something back a little bit, but Paynes Grey is too blue. And because we're working in yellowy golden tones, we can't have anything too blue, otherwise it'll send everything green. So having actually a purpley shadow will work really, really nicely. I think so anyway. So I'm going to, again, I've got everything mixed up to a sort of coffee tea consistency, nice and liquidy. And I'm just going to use it as my buffet of colour once more with my size 8 brush. And I think it's really important when you're painting something with texture is to follow the contours of the shape. When I'm painting animals and the bodies and the fur, I always try and paint with sending the brush in the direction of the fur or the feathers, whatever it might be. And I think it is exactly the same with something like a sand dune. Also, isn't this nice? It sort of looks a bit like a wave, which I think is a lovely touch. So I'm bringing in a bit more of the sort of richer colours towards the front. And you'll notice I also have green gold and sap green in here. And that is going to help me with the grasses on the sand as well. So at this point I'm just going to sort of mark them in. Keeping things nice and light at this point because we have got all these textural grasses that are going to go in on top, but I'm going to bring some moon glow actually into these greens just to desaturate them a little bit, and whilst it's still wet, oh, that's a nice colour actually. I'm discovering new things live, live on camera. Because that's a nice thing with watercolours, you're constantly making new discoveries. Just going to soften that in. And then we might get a bit of wet on wet coming into the grass, into the sand there, because we will be layering up and adding much more texture. Okay, that's looking nice. And then I will just place in, we've got some shadow sort of coming down there and down there. So I want to just place in the sort of the basis of those colours being there. And then also just the tiniest bit of faint shadow in the distance, because our colours, like I said, I want them to be richer towards the front and bolder, and then we can allow for things to be just a little bit more faded in the distance, and that's what helps give us this sense of near and far. Our sky and water are now dry, so we'll focus back on those, and I've just got some Paynes Grey here, and I'm going to go quite cautiously, taking quite a lot of the colour off the brush. And I'm going to go back in and sort of recreate the shape of where these clouds are. So it might be just a little bit underneath there somewhere. And you can see how the glaze is working. It's a see-through layer that's sort of coming up over the top of these light layers and sort of changing the makeup of it all. pleased with that. Clouds are one of those things that just the more you try them, the more they will start to make sense. And often it's about what you're painting around rather than what you're actually painting. It's not dissimilar to how we sort of approach painting water. Waves and ripples and light and dark. But I think what comes from having very little paint on your brush is the recipe for success. And you can see how low I've angled my brush here. I'm not doing this. I'm right down the side, almost like scraping the brush there. And I'm really pleased with that. So I'm going to move towards the water now. And I think really there's two things we can do here. One is just intensifying that colour a little bit. So I'll get some of my aqua green and I'm going to just use this as a glaze on top of my water. And in fact, I might go for my large brush. Just check it's clean. When you're doing glazes, it's so important to make sure your brush is clean. And that's what the paper towel is so useful for. It's just double checking that there aren't any hidden surprises in that paper, in the brush. And look at that. That's just so lovely. I think it'll just ties the whole thing together. And then as I come down the front, I just want to make sure I don't lose some of those lovely, like true white highlights, whereas the glaze has given us a nice sort of cohesion to the rest of the piece. So we'll let that dry and we can start to think about a bit more texture on here. So this is a little bit damp still, so I'm just going to give it another few minutes because I want it to be really dry for the next layer. I've brought in the smaller brushes now and I've just changed my kitchen paper around, so if you're alarmed, where's that red come from? It's just an old bit of paint. I try and recycle as much as possible, and these bits of paper towel like last a long time. So anyway, I'm now going to start to increase the thickness of the consistency of my colours to be a bit more milk cream like, because we're going to start adding layers of detail. And we need our colours to be just that little bit thicker. And also the grasses have actually got a lot of golden colours in them, so I'm going to be mixing these a bit more. In fact, that's a lovely colour. So I've got some sort of tufts, and then I've got big long bits of grass really in the foreground. So we need to have a think about sort of where to begin, and I like to begin somewhere in the middle. And I can see I've got some rather tufty grass, so it was quite useful having that little piece of moon glow washed in. And what's great is just by sort of placing one bit of colour on the page, and then I sort of just diluted my brush a fraction. Look how it's changed colour, even though it's exactly the same paint that's on my brush. And I'm just going to sort of work my way in and using the browns and greens and sort of layering up, but then also just coming back to some of my sandy colours and sort of layering up a little bit of texture. And this also helps just establish where the sort of the layers come. there'll be shadows, but I also sort of fancy just sort of building up textures with some of the warm colours as well. So I'm doing this all with a size 2 brush, and it's just about okay for these sort of mid areas. But I'm pretty sure we're going to want to move into smaller brush territory very soon. So I've started to work in texture on that side, and I'm going to just do the same now with my 0 size brush. And I'm also incorporating a little bit of deep sap green, just very sort of sparingly, but especially when we start to get a few little tufty bits just sort of creeping up over the ocean. I want to make sure that these things can be seen. So I'm just trying to sort of scribble the brush, not be too sort of specific and tidy with it, but I'm also just focusing in on the inner bits because we've got these grasses that are going to be sort of playing an important role. So we're just layering up slowly. The grass feels a bit longer on the left-hand side. But because we put in that wash beforehand with some of the green tones, it's making our life a lot easier. It means that we don't have to do quite so much painting because the foundations are already in there. So again, if you sort of look, I'm changing the angle of my brush depending on what it is I'm painting. So sometimes it'll be nice and high, like that, and then other times I'll be getting in with the lower angle. I want different elements of control, and then I can start to sort of build up the longer grasses in the front. The nice thing is we're painting with such of small amounts of colour that things will be drying quite fast, so it's easy to slowly build it up. I've now brought in the rigger brush, and what I've done is I've just sort of spread the paint out in my palette wells so I can get a really nice coating on there. And now I'm going to start to slowly, it takes a bit of time, build up the grasses in the foreground of the piece. And you can see now why I don't need to paint every piece of grass in the background here, because it would have been fighting with this bit here. But what I do want to think about is how this grass kind of is planted in the ground. And there's quite a lot of golden yellow bits sort of sticking up. And it's always good to get a few sort of deeper ones in there as well. So the rigger brush is another fantastically useful brush that I highly recommend you have in your kit. Just makes such lovely long lines. So I'm just using a clean wet brush to just sort of give that a little bit of grounding, and then maybe a little bit of moon glow in there as well, whilst it's still a bit wet. I think that helps a lot because there is some darkness in there. We'll let that dry, and then we'll do the other side as well, same thing. There is quite a lot of sort of shadow coming off this side, so we'll be mindful of that as well. And yeah, just enjoy placing in these lovely long loopy lines that really do create the piece. They really frame it very nicely. So I let that dry, and I also rubbed out the pencil. Not a lot of pencil visible, but there are tiny weeny bits. And now I'm going to start looking back at the water here. And what I've got is a little bit of Paynes Grey. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it into a little low light. So just down in the foreground, where the colours are going to be a lot more sort of vibrant and intense, we can help that along by just finding the sort of the shadier undersides, finding the highlights, and just building up a bit of deeper colour on those waves. And then as we sort of go further into the distance, it's nice to put a little bit of that in. But it gets a little fainter and fainter as it goes off into the distance. So you can just use what you've got left on the brush. I also like to just sort of clean off the brush and use maybe a bit of more of a glaze. You can sort of just soften some of those in and create a little bit of texture without. There we go, and then off into the distance it just sort of disappears. So that's looking nice. And then over here on the grasses, it's looking really good. There are sort of faint, let's get rid of the blue on my brush. So there are faint kind of shadowy things, indents on the grass, on the sand. Got to be careful with these. You don't want to sort of make them too sort of plonked on, but I can see a few little sort of footprints coming around the corner. So I've just got a bit of moon glow, glazing that on. But yeah, I don't want to sort of do too much of that. But what I do want to do, especially on this side here, where the shadow is coming down more, is get that kind of shadiness. And we might see a little bit of shadow in the grass on the sand. This is the joy of glazes with watercolour, is once your piece is dried, you can glaze over the top and really create sort of a whole new feeling of it. And this bit, that moon glow in with the yellow ochre tones, feels really perfect for it. And again, I'm just so glad that I painted in those washes beforehand. So it's funny, this size brush works for the kind of rippling ends of the grass, but I sort of want to get into a bigger size brush, a sort of size 2, as I get closer in, there we go, to the grasses, because otherwise we'll be here all day. And you can, if you're careful, just about get a fine line on those grasses. And so you see what's happening here is a sort of bump in the sand. So what I'm going to do is take a tiny bit of that colour and just get a little bit of texture going right in the foreground there. Because on this side, where the light is really hitting it, we can have some lovely warm textures. Not too much, and we want to achieve a lovely bit of that golden sand, the lovely pale, sort of fairly untouched, highlighted bit in the middle somewhere. So just be careful as you go. But that looks pretty lovely, and I think we are done. So what I will say is just have a go, keep practicing. I found seascapes and landscapes really quite intimidating for a long time, and I just made myself do more, and that's all that there is to it. However naturally talented you are, it's all about practice. So I hope you enjoyed it. This is a piece that has been chosen by the YouTube channel members, and if you want to join us and support the channel, you get a vote each month, you get a behind the scenes camera roll update from me each week, and you get your very own hand-painted emojis to use, and it's just a bit of fun and a lovely way to just show your support, really. So just click the join button underneath the video and you'll see plenty more little perks that have come your way over the months, and I will see you again next time. So don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and we will see you again. Thanks, bye.